Hello and welcome as you all are joining us for our webinar this afternoon. We'll give it just a minute as folks are joining. And as you're orienting to the Zoom view as you're joining us today, feel free to use the chat feature, drop in where you're joining from. Hello. It's good afternoon for us. Good morning, depending on where others are joining.
Yeah, for those in our area, I wonder if they'll be calling in from outside. It is a lovely afternoon here in Minnesota.
Certainly is. The sun is shining, light breeze.
Mm-hmm. Calm
Well,
before the storm of summer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all kind of feel that. I know I was just having a conversation yesterday about just how wild this season can get with, I'm thinking graduation. My niece is graduating this Friday, tomorrow. But graduations, the start of season, school ending, there's just a lot that's happening. So really appreciate folks who are joining us live here on the webinar today and taking some time out of your day to invest in your own learning and development. And this series of Illuminated Conversations and the conversation we'll have today is really coming from a series where we've been talking about stress and stressors, mostly in the workplace, but I think as we can all recognize that our external worlds and lives can have an influence on how we're showing up and how that's impacting us in the workplace as well. But as we think about this idea of stress and workplace climate, we're going to talk about how those environments, how we feel in our workplaces can have an impact on things like engagement, our level of satisfaction, and even productivity. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about who we are here at the Lumen Group. And as we've shared on previous Illuminated Conversations, we're really on this mission to reshape the way that we work together and to create more human-centered workplaces. And what we mean by that is really putting the humans at the center of what we're doing and really fostering that idea of connection, effective communication and engagement so that we can be more satisfied and productive in what we're doing. And in our work, really supporting that through our individual and group coaching, workshops, to really lead and support leaders at all levels of organizations, really equipping people with informations or insights that can be powerful, but also the strategies and tools to be even more effective. So with that, I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Megan Broger, our founder and president here at the Lumen Group, Donnie Hobbs, senior consultant. We also have, although not with us on the front side, on camera, Danielle Simmons, our administrative and operations manager, and then myself, Dr. Emily Hedberg, senior consultant. So as we talk about this idea of creating more human-centered workplaces, how we manage stress and manage stressors within the workplace, we've shared on previous Illuminated Conversations our model around centered leadership. So when we think about this idea of us showing up in the workplace, most of us don't get up in the course of our day or as we're driving into our workplaces to think about, today I'm really going to be unproductive or unfocused. I'm really going to see who I can disconnect with or disengage with even more directly. So when we ask this question of, what gets in the way of us being more effective, more engaged in the workplace, oftentimes we hear, people are stressed out. We have too much going on, the volume of emails or things that are coming at us, the decisions that we need to make. We're coming from this place of stressed out or overwhelm that can really put us off center. We're not as grounded or really just based in what we would say from a biological perspective for more of that regulated state, a state that allows us to be more intentional, purposeful, thoughtful about how we really engage with ourselves and those around us. So from that biological perspective, when our nervous system is not regulated or not in center, that can really cause us to be out of balance. It causes us just to be less effective in how we're showing up and engaging with the people around us in a way that impacts, as I said, our connection, communication, but as we'll talk about today, our workplace climate as well. And just to show a visual of what this means when we think about this idea of being off center or out of range, it's really, again, not being able to connect with those resources that can help us to be even more effective. And when we're out of range, we're just less effective in being able to reach in and be resourced, allowing us to think about maybe how to more effectively communicate, what message we're trying to get across, how we stay curious in how we engage with those around us, and even how we contribute to the environment that we're a part of. So with that, I'm going to have us engage in a little bit of an experiential exercise. And Donnie will lead that through us in just a moment. But this is something that we start a lot of our workshops and our trainings with, even as we think about some of the leaders that we coach, is to really start from more of that resourced or centered place before we get into this portion of learning, engaging, and really reflecting on workplace stress and stressors. So Donnie, why don't you lead us through an exercise?
That sounds great. Thank you, Emily, and welcome everyone. As Emily mentioned, I think it's really important to be intentional as we step into the next thing, whether that's just starting our day or stepping into the next meeting or the next engagement, to just take a moment and recenter. And that, again, is really what our model is all about, is taking care of our nervous system, or as we call it, our operating system. It's one of our most valuable resources. And if we take care of it and tune into it, it can be, it's full of information. It's always kind of responding and letting us know what we need in that moment. And so one of the exercises that I really like, I took a phrase from Mel Robbins, who's a motivational speaker, and the phrase is pull over. And so before I step into my day, I'm always really intentional. I try to be intentional about just pulling over and taking a moment to be intentional about how I want to move into my first meeting or move into my day. And I found that to be really helpful. And a lot of times, if you use this throughout the day, what you'll find is that, when you pull over, it just do an operating system check, that things aren't operating maybe in the way that we would hope. Sometimes we're feeling a lot of stress, or moving at too fast of a clip, doing too many things at once. And so by recentering in this way, by using this technique or some of the other techniques that we've talked about, can be really a really grounding way to kind of reset, start over, and move ahead more effectively. So I'll walk us through this. It's very brief, and you can do this anywhere or anytime. So let's just settle in and take a couple of deep, slow breaths and just start to regulate our system, coming into the present moment. With this idea of pulling over, let's get off of that busy path. Let's get off of that mental racetrack that sometimes we step into. And just ask, what do I need? Or how do I want to show up in my next meeting? Or how can I be intentional about what I do right after this exercise? And by pulling over and creating that space, we create the opportunity for insight, creativity, intentionality to move in and help us move forward in the best way, rather than being on autopilot, trying to do everything at once, feeling scattered. And that's really all it takes. Pull over, check in. How do I want to do the next thing? Set that intention and move forward. And that's it.
It always amazes me how simple these things sound, and yet how impactful that can be. Just some key questions, or even that phrase, just just pull over, to me brings up such a visual of just, yeah, pause. What do I need? But you also mentioned, Donnie, this idea of how do I want to show up? How do I want to be more intentional? And I think that will be a strong part of the conversation today. I know it has in other illuminated conversations, this idea of, we can be grounded and in range for ourselves, but ultimately it's also about how we're showing up and influencing the environment around us. So as we think about this topic of stress and workplace climate, Megan, I'm going to have you start by just defining a little bit of what that means and how that might be different from workplace culture. I think more maybe of a sense of something that we hear more commonly.
Yeah, that's an important question. Climate and culture are often used interchangeably, but they're actually pretty different things. So workplace culture is something that really encompasses the shared values, the beliefs, the attitudes, and the behaviors that kind of characterize that organization or that group of people. So it's kind of like the organization's personality, if you will. It might include things like mission statement, um, communication style, how decisions are made, those really kind of ingrained, consistent things that happen within and across an organization. Whereas climate refers more to kind of what is the kind of the prevailing energy or atmosphere. It's more of kind of how it really feels to be in that workplace. So if culture is personality, you can think of climate like mood. And so we can see, climate as having more of that emotional tone or vibe that people can really feel when they step into a workplace. And that can be influenced by things like the style of the leader or leaders in that environment, how supervision or management looks, how it's practiced, what is the current kind of sense of morale of individuals on the team. And so and it can also just be, what is that kind of felt sense of the workplace environment? And that's something that's been a little bit interesting over the course of the pandemic, because what we've discovered is that climate extends and culture extends beyond the brick and mortar space. So when we say environment, we don't necessarily just mean a physical space. It does have a lot to do with how do people feel when they are in connection with others at work.
And I think such a helpful distinction, Megan. I'm curious why focus on climate as opposed to culture?
Yeah, typically culture is something, because it is so ingrained in the elements that are really kind of core tenets and foundational components of an organization. That can be something that can take quite a bit of time to try to understand and to try to change in intentional ways. Whereas climate is something, because again, if culture is to personality like climate is to mood, climate is something that really can change based on the mood of the leader in a particular day, or a week, or kind of a season of a workflow or delivery. Or it can be influenced by one team member who is really disengaged, or extraordinarily uncooperative, or maybe even kind of unnecessarily conflictual. And so climate is something that we focus on because it is something that's a bit more tangible. It's more it makes up the kinds of things that we can really behaviorally observe and understand, and can actually make some pretty significant impacts in a relatively short order if we understand what's needed.
And I think there's that power in that too, as you use that, term mood. It's the energy and atmosphere that can be quickly shifted and changed with the right type of maybe focus or intervention.
Yep, absolutely.
As we've been having this conversation around just stress and workplace stressors, Donnie, curious to hear your thoughts on how stress can just impact that workplace climate and how they might actually influence one another, both, positively or maybe not so positively.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think stress definitely has an impact on workplace climate, especially if it's chronic and perpetual. Stress is so contagious. You know, we don't have to even have a direct conversation or engagement around or with someone who's feeling really stressed in order to pick that up. But the good news is that it goes the other way too. That sensation of being grounded is also very contagious and can really help somebody who's stressed, you know, come into a little bit more of that grounded space so that they have more resources and capacity. But I think going back to what you were both talking about, the idea of mood. Mood is something that we can manage and alter effectively. And when we're coming at it from the biological perspective, how do we regulate the nervous system? I think that's one of the best ways to navigate stress and to mitigate stress. And stress in and of itself, you know, I want to point out that it's not bad, right? We need it, and it's just an emotion, and we have this flow of emotions coming through us. And so I think one of the things that can get us in trouble is when we have leaders or individuals who are stressed, who either aren't working through it or aren't recognizing it.
Yeah.
And it's just this thing that they're carrying that really has an impact on others around them. And so by even having a conversation about, hey, I'm feeling stressed out today, that can be a relief for the person feeling stressed, but it can also help other people around get a sense of like, oh, okay, that's what's going on, and help, you know, kind of relieve that tension in the room.
Yeah, instead of people trying to interpret what that maybe stress or feeling is about, for them to really name that for others. Here's what's going on with me, as maybe a bit of a heads up. You know, curious to hear your perspective on, you know, do you think there are specific roles or industries where maybe people are more prone to that stress due to workplace climate?
Yeah. I would say in our experience that this really ties pretty closely to the level of influence or power that somebody has in a particular dynamic, whether that's within the team or within the organizational hierarchy. Folks who have less influence or power in that structure or in that dynamic, I think tend to be those that might notice and absorb more of that energy, either positive potentially or negative or less helpful, because they are often in roles where they're adapting to those that are, you know, above them. They're monitoring and they're adapting, as opposed to setting that mood or setting the tone. And so I think in terms of susceptibility, there is that that element of influence. Do I feel like I can change the tide in this situation? And if I don't, then I'm going to feel more vulnerable, kind of more exposed to whatever is coming at me from whomever else in that dynamic.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, Megan, this idea of climate being really that felt sense, right? Maybe the vibe I'm getting, you know, how I'm feeling about the atmosphere. And oftentimes we interpret that for ourselves, or as you're saying, right, we might observe that in others. But I'm wondering if there's a way that we assess that. How do we get a sense of what that workplace climate really is?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and it's one I think that there's many different perspectives on. There could be kind of one-on-one or group interviews. There could be focus groups. There could be any sort of kind of review of any ongoing kind of internal documentation, whether that's performance evaluations, just like what, you know, kind of what are the trends looking like there, or there are many different kinds of surveys that can be done to try to really understand what are employees experiencing day in and day out. And so we have a tool called the Illuminated Climate Survey, and it looks at different kind of behaviorally based things within a dynamic of any size group, whether that's a team of 5 or an organization of, you know, 5,000. It's looking at what are the behaviors that I'm engaging in, and what are the behaviors that I'm seeing others engage in that have an impact on me, that have an impact on my sense of certainty in my team or in the organization, that have an impact on how connected I feel, how trusted and trustworthy the things feel within the organization. So really, it has to do with some elements of what's called psychological safety. And that's really what our tool is looking at trying to understand, because we really do believe that that is a really important component. Psychological safety is a really important component of helping to strengthen climate as well as culture, but first climate for sure within teams and again of organizations of any size. And it's just, it's a series of short questions. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to complete, and then it gives us some really great information to facilitate some conversation around where are their strengths, where are their unknowns, and where might there be some opportunities to pay some attention to kind of shift that mood, begin to kind of turn that energy into a more positive direction.
Right. And once we have that information, we can do things with that
Yes.
as individuals on the team and collectively as we lead the team. Megan, you brought up a good point in this idea around a power differential or maybe influence differential, right? Individuals on the team who are maybe more, as you described, observing and adapting to the climate versus those that are maybe leading and really setting the climate itself. And I'm wondering if we could maybe shift the conversation to talk a bit about how we might create more positive workplace climates. From those two perspectives, what can we influence? What could we maybe start to create to really shift that to be different?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
that's
ahead.
a great question. I think, as part of our last conversation, we were talking about where to start with that, where to start creating the sense of connection or the climate that we're looking for. And at any level, we always start with ourselves. We look at, what can I do to navigate my system most effectively? And a lot of times I think when we are in that role of having less control, we can get into a story about how other people's moods or experiences keep us stuck. But I think if we start with ourselves and we look at how can I step into today intentionally and from a grounded position, that's going to be the best chance that we have at being able to positively influence other people, to be able to whether you're influencing up, across, or down. But that being centered really accentuates our ability to remain consistent. And when we're consistent, that fosters trust. When, one day I come in, I'm really upset and throwing things around or, visibly angry, and then the next day I'm in a great mood, it puts people on their heels. They're not sure what to expect. But if we can remain grounded, at least we're staying consistent. We build that trust a little bit, and that creates more open communication, and more open communication allows for, that more open, hey, I'm kind of stressed out today. Could you have my back a little bit? Or I just need a little space. And so I think you start to shift the climate really quite quickly, just by engaging a little bit differently as you step into your day or as you ground throughout the day.
Yep.
Yeah, and just that key of creating some of that consistency can make a huge difference. And Megan goes back to even that psychological safety, as you talked about creating. When there's predictability or some constant to that, that's where it's really going to be fostered. Can I trust that this is going to be the case? And if there's inconsistencies, that's going to be more challenging.
Yep, absolutely.
Megan, we had a really great question come in around this idea of, at this point, this person's company is going through a point in transition. So there was recently a reduction in their workforce. So the question they're posing is, how can I help myself and my team in the messy middle? How do we either maintain or create that workplace climate when things are really shifting or maybe aren't quite settled?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I want to first of all commend this person for recognizing that they are in the messy middle, because I think we pay attention to beginnings and we pay attention to endings, and we don't necessarily pay attention to the middle of things. And so just being able to place yourself in that moment in time and recognizing, okay, we're moving past what we've known before. Things look different now. We might not know exactly what the future is going to look like. So we are in this messy middle, and being able to kind of um, declare that and accept that as the reality that we're coming from, I think is really important, because we're not saying we're stuck here, this is how it's going to be. We're recognizing that there's been a loss, there's been a change that we've come from, and there's probably some chaos and some uncertainty in this messy middle, and there might not be enough information to know exactly what the future will look like. And so it is messy, and there's a ton of uncertainty, and that can create some real challenges. And so, again, I think just recognizing you're in the messy middle is a really important first step in being able to build some resilience within the team to navigate that situation. Because if we look at, well, this is in no means meant to sound like a formula, but we recognize that there really are kind of four key components in building resilience as an individual or even collectively. And the first part of that has to do with just recognizing what is the current reality and trying to be realistic with that. It's trying to kind of let go, maybe of what was before, respect it, recognize it, but we can't cling to it if it's not part of our current reality. And try to bring our current reality into focus. Based on that reality, then we can come up with a couple of goals. And these can be, in this case, these would be goals about how do we as a team want to navigate the messy middle? How do we as a team want to acknowledge the team members that we've lost? How do we as a team want to acknowledge we've got questions that maybe can't get answered? What are a couple of goals that we can focus on based on our current reality? And then we want to try to generate some optimism or some hope. So what resources do we have on our team to help us achieve those things? We might not be able to influence whatever else is the decisions that are happening more broadly at the organization, but within this team, what are some resources that we can bring to bear on those goals that we've set? We can do this. How can we generate a little bit of momentum? And this isn't false positivity, but it is in an effort to say we can come together and try to achieve something within our sphere of influence to move ourselves a bit further forward in this messy middle, and then try to stay connected as a team, as a community, around those goals. And so being in that connection and in that community is a huge part of building and maintaining resilience. And this is actually something that's come up, not necessarily a reduction in force, but we've certainly heard from many teams that we've had the opportunity to work with that there's been either an acute, like a clear stressor, like a reduction in force, or just kind of this prolonged period of stress, for whatever reason. And so we've been able to go in and spend a day, and it's something that we call the stress and micro strategy retreat, where we come in, we help a team really understand what are the stressors. Let's name them, let's understand them, talk a little bit about how we can individually navigate stress, how we can understand it, how we can respond to it, as well as how, as a team, we might be able to understand that, and then kind of end with, so what are a couple of things we as a team can focus on to help reduce stress, kind of increase communication and connection, and move us forward. And that, I think, that type of opportunity just to come together and do some centering and some goal setting to keep things really manageable and tangible, provide some clarity amidst the chaos, can be hugely helpful.
Mhm.
I think in addition to that, Megan, what you described is even how we come together and talk about those things really matters, right? When it's unclear, or we know we're experiencing it, but we're not talking about it, or maybe we're talking about it, but we don't have a clear plan.
Right.
That can be really stressful. And it makes me think, or go back, as we get ready to close here, is really consider that idea of pulling over, right? How can I check in? And how do I want to show up? And that power of influence, as Donnie was saying, stress can be contagious, but so can our groundedness, right? Some of that clarity, the way that we show up can really foster that just trust and engagement across the team. And as Megan mentioned, in addition to some of our workshops where we certainly specialize and come in and to create that experience, we also have some upcoming Illuminated conversations where we're going to be talking about that idea of stress and micro strategy. So what we can do individually, collectively as a team to really influence and create some of that positive momentum or change to our workplace climate. So certainly want to thank you all for joining today. I know that half an hour goes really quickly. Certainly appreciate Donnie, Megan, your insights, and encourage you, although we have a plan for some of these upcoming Illuminated conversations, if there are questions or topics that you would find a lot of value in, we'd certainly be happy to field those ideas and to really create some more meaningful conversations with you all. So stay connected with us on LinkedIn, as we'll share just some additional upcoming offerings and ways to get in contact with us. But thank you for the time. I hope you all have a great rest of the day. And again, remember, pull over, reset. How are you planning to show up as you re-engage back in your work life?
Thanks,
Take care,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Donnie.
Thank you.